Okay guys, so this is Ariel over here at Nyth. The other day when I mentioned I was going to work on my garden planning for, I've organized the seeds, you can go back and see those videos, and there's still snow on the ground, still a good bit of it, so I'm not going to be planting, but planning for where I'm going to put things. As I mentioned, I have to redo that a little bit this year because in the past, you can see some of my old garden plans here in the stack. If you can, this one's actually filled out on both sides. But anyway, you can see I had all long, straight beds, as you probably have seen if you have ever seen any of my other gardening videos. And because the shape of the layout of the garden has changed since I made raised beds to hopefully be gopher proof. And yes, they got, if you didn't watch any of those videos, go check it out. They hopefully are all made out of materials that are not chewable through by small rodents. So they're a slightly different design and a different location, so I got to think a little bit about how I'm going to arrange things. And so I made myself a rough draft, which is all sloppy, and no one needs to look at my handwriting on that. Because I did a bunch of scribbling out and so on to figure out what I wanted. So then the part you can see here is my little blank garden. This is, while looking at the house this way, this would actually be laid out kind of like that on the dirt. This end being closest to the house and this furthest away, which also makes this end slightly uphill and the sunniest, and this end slightly downhill and less sunny. So it's kind of laid out all symmetrical if you don't count this top bed, and then I didn't have enough blocks or room for anything else, so I just put one extra one on the end there. Anyway, so this is what I think about when I'm planning for all these things. I have some things that like more sun and some things that like less. I have things that like to be warmer and things that don't like to get too hot. I have things that grow taller and things that stay really short. That's important because of the frost covers that go over the beds. They're kind of rounded like that, so things in the center have a lot more height than things on the sides, and so on. So I kind of am thinking about all of that stuff when I plan what I'm going to put where. The other thing is that it's not really connected to this plan, but that I wanted to mention because it comes up a lot when I talk about what I can grow here and such with the climate is, oh, you're a growing zone, whatever, I can grow this, so you should be able to too. So growing zone is an important piece of information. What it tells you is what generally the average, or not, I don't think it's the average, but the coldest temperature that it's going to get in the winter is. So whether your coldest temperature is freezing or 0, this is Fahrenheit, or -10 or -20 or -40 or whatever. If that's the coldest day it ever gets, there's a lot of plants like bushes and even, other plants like asparagus or trees like a pear tree, whatever, that will I don't know this one for sure, so I'm making this up. Let's say a pear tree will die if it's more than 20 below. So if you live in a growing zone where it is up, never below 20, ever, not for one day, then a pear tree will grow and it will live every year and keep growing. Some things can be annual, which means they only live 1 year and die in a colder area, and that can be okay. For both sunflowers and veggies, you just have to save seeds or buy seeds and replant them the next year because they die, but they would be a perennial if they were somewhere warmer. They would come back on their own every year or never die out. And that's fine. But something like a fruit tree, which takes quite a few years to mature in the first place, you can't just replant a fruit tree brand new every year and never get, you could, but you would never ever get any fruit from it. So it'd be kind of a waste. So that's what growing zone tells you. It tells you what the coldest is. Now what growing zones do not tell you is if the coldest your temperature gets is -20, it does not tell you if it stays at -20 for one day a year normally, which would be enough to kill that pear tree. Again, I'm making that up. I'm not sure. There's different varieties of pears even have different hardinesses. But let's say that pear tree dies at -20 Fahrenheit. If you have one day below that, it will kill it, and that will be it. But what growing zone doesn't tell you at all is if there is only one day indeed of that temperature, or if it may be -20 for 150 days in a row. Either way, your pear tree is dead. So that is a useful piece of information, or your strawberry variety, or your raspberries, or your hostas, or whatever else you're planting. But it does not tell you how long it is cold. And fairly obviously, if you have one day that is that cold, versus have 150 days when it's that cold, that's going to make a very big difference in what you can grow. So I live in a growing zone 3 toward the cold side of 3. That's talking about the coldest we get. What that does not address is the fact that it is there's snow on the ground for 8 months a year. You could have a growing zone 3 that gets that cold, but you have many, many less months of snow on the ground. And then the other thing is that all summer long we generally get frost. Not every single night, but quite often, sometimes multiple nights in a row. There's some little gardening calculators where you can look up like your address, and it'll tell you, what's your generally average last frost date and first frost date in the fall, and it gives you an idea of what your growing season is, the empty space in between when it quits frosting and when it starts again. That's how long of a season you generally have to grow things. And there are crops, if you look at the back of a seed packet, it'll generally say these peas will mature in 55 days, or these squash, butternut squash will take 110 days, or so on. So you need that long of a stretch without the plant freezing and dying for it to produce something edible generally. And it can always vary a little bit depending on your humidity and whatever. Those are generalizations, but that gives you some idea. So if you put like my parents' area code in Pennsylvania where I grew up into such a calculator, it tells you that this is the last frost date and this is the first frost date, and that they have, I don't know what it is, I think something like 165-day growing season. So there's 165 days between the two dates when it generally freezes. Of course, you can have years that are exception, but that's the norm. When I put my current location in it, it tells me year-round frost risk, growing season not applicable. I do not have a frost-free time, period. I just don't. And that is why I grow, sometimes there will be several weeks in the summer where there isn't a frost. We might get a little bit of a warm spell, but we might get snow and frost in July and August. We've had occasionally a somewhat substantial snowstorm, like on the fireworks on 4th of July and so on. So that can happen. That is why, if you go back and look at the seed videos, that is why I pick the varieties I do. Most things I grow are things that do not die when they freeze. Things like kales and chards and onions and garlics and so on. Anyway, go check out that video. But those things don't die when they freeze, which is important to me because I pretty much count on it freezing all summer. So I just wanted to address that because I get a lot of questions or even some people that kind of weirdly get really angry and say, you should be able to grow whatever because I live in a place that's also cold and I can grow this. And it's like, that's awesome. You live in a place that is not quite as cold as my place. And I'm sure there's a few of you out there that live somewhere colder, and I know there's people in Antarctica, but I don't think they do a whole lot of gardening. So I'm just going to transfer my rough draft over here to a more tidy copy and kind of explain what I'm putting where and why. Just, this is my garden, this is what I plan for what I like to eat, what will grow here and so on. I'm sure there's no way you want to exactly duplicate this, but maybe it'll give you an idea of what I think about and how and why and so on. And then the other thing is I end up, if I look through my old years here, I usually have a garden plan, which is kind of a rough draft of where I plan to put things. And then I'll have one labeled Actual Garden 2016, where I write in each variety of different things I've tried. So if I have 6 different colors of carrots or 4 different colors of kale and such, I write in each variety and where I planted it, because I always think I'll remember, and I've learned over the years that I will not remember. And if one does really well and another one does really poorly, I would like to know that so that I can change which seeds I take the time to plant next year, if that makes sense. So I'm not writing in on this right now which exact variety goes where. I'll do that when I plant them, so I know I actually have what's there. So the first bed closest to the house, for one, this is going to be the first bed I or anybody else who's here sees all the time. So I'd like to have a pretty variety just visually of different things. And again, the top side of the garden is going to be a little sunnier. The bottom side is going to be a little shadier. That is a fact of life because I live on the north side of a hill in the trees. Nothing could be done about that without clear cutting the trees and dynamiting the hillside. So I think about what I want where for that. And this first long bed, if I can, I like to plant things in a little bit like a square foot gardening method or a wide row method. There's quite a few. Listen to different different gardeners, they have different methods, but I generally like to plant a whole block of something. So if this was my garden bed, I plant, a bunch of, and you'll see this when I plant, a whole bunch of things across here versus individual rows of seeds like this. So down here in the shady side, because it doesn't need a lot of sun and it prefers to be cool, I'm going to do a block of kale. That's my plan. And then I'm going to do a block of chard, which is related and also likes fairly cool temperatures. And then some bok choy, which is also related. And again, this is going to give me a really pretty visual variety when I first walk up to the garden. Then I'll probably do some beets, and I think up here toward the warmer end, actually, I'm going to plant my asparagus, which I have out there still. I planted 3 years ago now. So I'm going to move that into this new bed. And that obviously is a perennial, so that will stay in that location every year. That's kind of one of the reasons I want it in a corner. And the other reason that is helpful is because I am going to be using frost covers, but asparagus is so frost hardy I don't usually need to cover it. So I can just cover this whole end of the bed, and if I don't make a cover long enough to cover that end, I'm not wasting my cover and I'm not leaving anything else to freeze. So that gives me a nice variety of beautiful things to look at as I first walk up to my garden. Then this top bed is going to be one of my sunnier ones. I already have garlic planted at this end because it was the first bed I filled up last fall, and I wanted to get my garlic in before the ground froze, so that's where it is. That probably won't be where it is next year, but that's where it is this year. And the other thing I'm going to put up here, I think, is my beans. I plant some green beans and yellow beans and so on, and they like to be warm. Some years I get some years I get too many frosts, and even with frost covers I can't keep them from freezing. So we're going to put them up in the warmest spot. Then I have, because these also like being fairly warm, I've got 2 matching beds going this way, and I think I'm going to fill them both with potatoes because I can use a good many of those. I don't plant sweet potatoes. I would love to, but they need quite a few days growing season where the ground temperature is above 65, and my ground temperature is virtually never there, so I simply can't grow them because of that. The ground temp here down below the frost line year round is like 42, and like I said, we get frosts all summer long, so just doesn't work here. So I do plant white potatoes, gold potatoes, purple ones, pink ones, all of that, but I can't do sweet potatoes. So I'm going to have 2 full beds of potatoes, and probably planted the whole way wide with that. Then I've got some smaller beds here. We're going to put some Brussels sprouts and broccoli up both in this bed because they like a good bit of sunshine. I think one of these small center beds I'm going to fill up with my strawberries. That will be kind of nice because it will, the bed will contain its strawberries, like to send out lots of runners and root everywhere. So the small bed just full of just strawberries will contain that nicely. Then I think we'll do a little bit of all the lettuces, all the different colors and varieties and leaf shapes and everything I like to grow. I'll just do a whole mix there. That'll be really pretty too. And then our other matching bed here to our Brussels sprouts and broccoli. Let's do some cabbages, both red and green, because I like both of those. That'll probably fill that bed because I can always use a lot of cabbage. I eat a lot of it. I like making coleslaws. I like making sauerkraut. I like making the Danish Christmas cabbage. Go look up that recipe and so on. So I like lots of that. And then my bottom bed here where it stays a little cooler, I think I'm going to plant peas all down the center of it because they grow up taller. And I usually do whole peas and sugar snap peas, but we're going to fill the whole center of that bed. And then, because I don't want to plant them clear out to the edges because they'd be too tall and run into my frost covers, I'm probably going to plant some radishes down the side because they're real nice and low. So I can kind of line the peas with some radishes. Then, let's see here. So now I've got my 2 long beds. I'm going to put down the one center, again, because these grow up a little bit tall. I'm going to do cucumbers, and I have quite a few varieties of those, so I'll probably do that about almost the whole way down the center. I forgot, not quite. My other perennials that I have, planted right now, or I have some horseradish, and I will be moving that. So it's going to live at the end of one bed, and some rhubarb, which is going to live at the end of the other bed. Again, this will let me frost cover most of bed, not have to have a cover quite long enough to cover the whole ends. So those two will stay there. But the rest of the bed, we're going to do cucumbers down here, and then squashes. And this is not the hard winter squash because I don't have a long enough growing season, but this is zucchinis, golden squashes. I've got patty pan ones, lumpy ones, bumpy ones, all kinds of fun colors and shapes. So they're going to be down the center of each of those, and mostly up here toward the sunny end of the garden, which they'll like because those things like to be pretty warm. And again, I'm not going to plant them clear out to the edges like I do with a lot of the smaller things, where I can do a full block filling the whole bed because I have the height difference there. So along the side of the cucumbers, I'm probably going to do a long line of onions. And again, I'll stagger this. You'll see that. Plant some onions down the one side and maybe beets down the other, because I love beets and have lots of beets. And then along the squashes, let's do some more carrots, because I like those, and they're not very tall. Might actually do those on both sides. I might make some of this a little bit beets as well to give myself a little more space for that. So that's something like my general garden plan, if you can read that. I might have to take a close-up picture of that. I'm not sure how well it's showing up for the camera. So that's kind of what I do. And you can see that's pretty open and not very cluttered. Then as I fill in my, individual, what I actually plant and which varieties where, because carrots covers, that I have 10 different kinds of carrots. You'll see how it gets this is an older one. This was 2016's garden. How it gets very, very full with little scribbly handwriting as I try to notate which varieties I planted where. So again, just so that I can reference what did better for me or not to plant for the next year. Now, some of this stuff will rotate every year. I do try to do a crop rotation, but this is my plan for this year. So hopefully, again, like I said, I'm sure nobody wants to do the exact same thing that I'm doing. Like, they don't have the same shape of garden, you don't like to eat the same things, you don't have the same kind of climate, but hopefully that's a little bit of a helpful idea for how and why I think about what I'm going to put where. And that's kind of that for a while, because there's still a lot of snow out there. And when it first melts and I can see the ground, the first thing I have to do actually is to finish filling up the garden beds, because the ground froze before I could quite get done with that last year. So as soon as I have bare ground, I need to finish putting dirt in the new beds, and then I can go to planting. So that's what I'm looking forward to, and hopefully that's helpful to somebody else who's thinking about their gardening plans right now. Though you probably have a totally different situation, so if you've got one little bed or a big giant sprawl or only pots on your deck or whatever, just think about what's most important to you and what the kind of light is or heat or whatever in the different areas, and just plan out whatever you're working on. Hopefully all of us have wonderful gardens that are very productive this year. Hi folks, Ariel over here. Thanks for spending some of your valuable time watching these videos. Hopefully you found something beautiful, educational, interesting, peaceful, relaxing, or useful while you were here. If so, find more videos here, subscribe so you don't miss any updates, and if you like what you found here, feel free to like and share away so that others can benefit as well. You all have a wonderful day.